Thank you, Jeff. I'd like to welcome everybody to our webinar, which is from the service providers that we work with online. And many of you know me and our live events. We hold one at Gillespie's down in Pompano and one up in West Palm Beach at the Airport Hilton, which will be having another one on Friday with Association Reserves, and then one with DSS up at the airport on July 21st. So you have all kinds of opportunities, which are always listed on our website at TSK Marketing. So we're very happy to have Rudy today, and we're working with him on another course, which will be the first hour. So as Jeff said, please ask questions, tell us what you like, what else you'd like to see, because it helps us develop courses that are important in the field. We work on the website with the community association people, and anybody that's out there that's interested in joining the website, give me a call, let me know. My information is there. And without taking up too much time, because Rudy has a lot to give you, I'm going to turn it back to Rudy and let him get started with the first half, which is all about how we work on our properties and how we get our communities to work better and how they can help us. Rudy?
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get my screen up on everybody to see. Okay. All right. Good morning. Could Jeff, you could hear me? Terry, everything good?
Yep.
Okay. Terrific. Well, good morning. First of all, Terry and Jeff, thank you for letting me to present this morning. My name is Rudy Forjan. I've been with Benjamin Moore Paints since 1989 down here in the South Florida market, and I've been selling paint since 1976. So it's been for a couple years. The presentation we're going to do, it's a new presentation we put together, that I put together. However, it's something that it's an accumulation of the experiences that I've been doing for the last 30 years since I've been in the paint business. So I trying to get some good information put together, and they kind of just to put out a process when you're going to consider doing a painting project on your community or on your building. What is the process that you should go? Some pointers that you should consider and to think about. I want you to understand that this is not a plan that you have to follow verbatim. However, it is a recommendation of things to look for, things to consider, questions to ask, and so forth, so that you'll be able to kind of make a better choice when you're getting to paint your painting project. Being a new presentation, we are going to be applying this towards I'm going to try to make a CEU credit out of this course. So especially at the end, as Jeff was pointing out, if you could fill out the survey, give me your good, your bad about the presentation, I would really appreciate it, so that we could kind of fine tune this presentation to make it a regular presentation to get some CEU credits on it. So again, the one thing I do want to consider this strictly as an overview. This is not, there's everything that we put in here, and I'm going to discuss. You can confirm it on the internet, or the experience or your experiences that you have with property managers and other other people that you work with in the industry itself. And again, this is not, no one system is going to work for you perfectly. Take what I'm going to go over this morning, and to be able to just do it and put the pieces together and plagiarize it and use the pieces that's going to make you have a better presentation. So the first thing that you need to consider when you're doing any kind of a project on your community, and actually before you get started anything, is to do a reserve study. I know they're painful. They're not a very popular thing to do. However, it is a very important part to understand what you're doing with the community and what your community needs. And essentially what is a reserve study? It's a document used to forecast and budget for the major products in your community that you're going to undertake in the next few years. They usually include, major repair costs, replacement costs, costs for upgrades and or modernization of common elements. The idea is just that the goal of doing this together is to help determine life expectancies and replacement costs of those items in your community or condominiums. And it's a budgeting tool. It's going to be able to, to allow you to understand the reserve funding that you're going to be needing to do these particular projects. And it's not only going to be, with a paint part, but, since painting is going to be one of the biggest projects that you do in your community, this part is really important so that you can budget things in and kind of schedule it to make it sure that you're doing and spending money where you need to do. The other thing that's happening in light of the past events with Surfside, which is probably going to change our business completely, buyers are going to probably start wanting to understand about, how are you funding future projects and maintenance on buildings. So this is going to be a real important piece to understand. For what I'm told, best practice is to do it every 3 years. However, the best thing to do, let a professional guide you. There are a lot of firms out there, some property management firms that do this, but get the professional to guide you to be able to go along with you. Again, I think it's just it's a real important piece just to be able to be responsible and understanding of what you need to do, and, kind of balance everything out so that you're not caught behind or you're not caught unaware of projects that are coming forth on them. So the next thing I want to talk about is what is the purpose for painting your community and your building. Aesthetics is always going to be the most popular part about it. You want to maintain the look and feel of your HOA or your condominium. Freshly painted buildings and HOAs always maintain the property value better for your community. However, the part that I really like to drill on this is that, and I've always stated this since I've been, and then some of you have seen me in my classes when we talk about paint, is that the number one reason to paint is for protection. The paint, and then what goes along with the paint is your first line of defense on the substrates that you're using on your buildings and on your homes. And all the building materials that are being used on these structures are required to be painted, and paint will help you protect that. So it's important that you be able to do that. A lot of times when we put specifications together for doing a community, we're going to talk about trying to waterproof the building as much as possible, putting caulking around openings and so forth. And it's important to do that, and understanding, that that you have to make a watertight structure, doing the roof and using the reserve study to be able to balance this out and to kind of budget it out and move it forward with you. I think it's going to be a real important part to be able to kind of spend your money wisely and to do it the right way. And then another piece, and again, in light of the past issues, painting is usually going to usually prompt you to look at the structural safety in your property. So it's a good time to go ahead and start doing that. There's going to be a lot of changes, especially for buildings in the future, not only here in Palm Beach County, but through Miami-Dade and through the rest of the state of Florida. So we're going to be having more building certifications, more than likely. The windows are probably going to be tighter. It could be anywhere from the first on a new building, the first inspection mandatory to be done maybe 20, 25 years. And probably you're going to start to see follow-up inspections have to be done every 10 years after that, or so forth. But changes are coming. So it's important to be able to kind of be ahead of the process and understand that process itself. So the number one question I'm always asked when we're doing these presentations, when they talk to me, is when should we paint? How often should we paint the building? And to understand that, it's not easy to be able to understand that. Every situation is a little bit different. And again, I do other CEUs on paint basics, so you can get a better understanding on it. But I think what I need to do is just to give you a real quick overview about what paint is and how paint works. And the presentation, the CEU credit I'm doing after this one, will actually be able to talk to you a little bit more about paint itself and get you the idea of what you're going to understand. So basically, when you go with a can of paint, there's three components to paint: pigment, solvent, and resin. The solvent comes in a can of paint is going to evaporate. What's left is going to be the pigment and resin. But understand that most exterior coatings that are used outside on your walls, the majority of them are going to be applied anywhere from 2 mils to 8 mils wet, and a mil is 1/1000th of an inch. So imagine, even if you're applying a heavy coat of paint, you're putting 8 mils of paint on there. That's 8/1000ths of an inch. It's not a lot of paint that's being put on there. And then when it dries, it's even less than that. It will be anywhere from 1 to 8, maybe 10, 4 or 5 mils of paint on the wall itself. So there's a lot of balances out there to be able to do that. So when you're and one of the things you have to understand when you're repainting, or often you should, to understand how often you should paint, is that when you're repainting a building or your home or an HOA, every coat of paint relies on the last coat of paint applied to the substrate. So in other words, none of the paint soaks through the old paints and sticks to the original substrate. So it sticks to either one of them. So when you start to when you have to start to consider when to repaint is when you start to see a little bit of chalking. And chalking on a surface is essentially, we know what's left on the paint is pigment and binder. I'll get into the more details in my next session on that. But the pigment and the binder or the resin is what holds everything together on the wall. That will always break down. It doesn't last forever. When that begins to break down a little bit, you start to see a little bit of chalk. So what that means is that the integrity of that coating is starting to fall or come to the end of its useful life. So you really need to paint when it starts to begin to chalk, or ideally just before that begins to happen. And that really kind of changes a lot due to the fact, to where you're at. Obviously on the ocean, when you're getting a lot of sun, you're going to be getting a lot more issues. If you're in the interior, you have a lot of foliage, that's going to protect your substrate a little bit more. And then the other part you have to take in consideration is a lot of us manufacturers, we all issue warranties on the exterior work, but you have to understand what a warranty means. Now our next slide is going to talk a little bit about that. So the real easy answer to that, how often should you paint? There's not an easy answer. It really depends on the condition of the substrate itself. So we'll talk a little bit about warranties so you can understand what paint warranties mean. And I know me being with Benjamin Moore, we have I feel a pretty good warranties, but pretty much all the manufacturers do the same thing. But understand this, warranties could go anywhere from 5 to 15 years. However, just because that the warranty goes up to 15 years doesn't mean that you can wait until the end of that warranty period before repainting based on the other parts. And the reason behind that is that warranties don't cover normal wear and tear. You have to read the warranty itself to understand exactly what the warranty covers. Warranties generally are only extended to the paint on the masonry surfaces, not on metal, not on wood, and not on floors and other substrates like that. Just generally what's on the masonry surfaces. Fading and chalking is considered normal wear and tear in our industry. So understand that. Paints are going to change like that. Excessive wear and tear is, and the problem that we have as an industry is how do you cover excessive wear and tear? And there's no real measurements on the industry to measure if a surface is chalking too much or if it's fading too much. Fading and changing of colors is also not as considered wear and tear. So that's generally not covered 100%. So whatever color you put on your building or your homes doesn't mean that in the period of the warranty that color is not going to change. More than likely, the darker color you go with, the more change you're going to see. So you kind of have to keep that into mind. So that's part of the process what you're going through here. So when the ideal time when to repaint is that when you inspect your property, you have to kind of look for the least common denominator. So in other words, if you have 90% of your property that looks great, that's not chalking, that looks terrific, but you have 10% of your property that is maybe or less that's starting to chalk, and you're starting to see some wear and tear and effects of the coating, that's when you need to start planning to repaint and to be able to get a solid substrate. So when you put the next coat of paint on, you have a real solid substrate. If it goes chalking too much, then you have a lot of issues with adhesion and so forth. So when do you want to plan to prepare for the next paint job? As soon as possible. As soon as the last one's completed. It's a planning process. The more you plan, paint doesn't last forever. You have to kind of keep that in your mind when you're putting a painting process together. So the sooner you start on preparing for that process, keeping previous information from the previous job is only going to give you more information. and to be able to use the resources that we're going to go over here in a little bit. One of the biggest things that that I think you should do when you're doing a painting project, especially if it's again, one of your largest property things you can do on your building or community, form a paint committee. Shouldn't be any more than 3 to 5 people. And what this does is allows this paint committee to be able to interview people, look at different situations that we're going to go through, but then be able to put all the information together to be able to make it easier to report back to the board, so that your community can make those wise decisions with the funds that are available. And I think again, in my experience, the communities that have a paint committee that studies and goes through this and gets all of this information put together usually has the most successful paint job afterwards, and they have a better understanding on how to explain it to the different. They have the different communities and explain to the board, the nuances of the paint business and each of the contractors and so forth.
Hey, Rudy, just a quick question that's directly related. When it starts talking, how do you recognize that? Does it look like blackboard chalk is the question from the
Yeah, actually what you really need to do is just, as you're looking through there, if you start to see areas that are starting to get a little bit dirtier, or that, maybe a little bit of mildew is going on there, or just occasionally wipe your hand on the outside of a wall as you're walking through your community. If you turn your hand and you see a little bit kind of a chalky residue left on the surface of your hands, that's usually the best taste. I mean, the best test to be able to do this. You see me walking through the communities, been doing it as long as I have. I just have a habit of just rubbing walls everywhere I walk through, because I want to see what the condition of that wall is. So that's really the easiest way to be able to do that.
And then one other real quick one: are paint specs different from balcony floor paint versus exterior wall paint?
Paint specs are kind of instructions how to paint. So they are, and they'll be described in the paint spec. There are different coatings for floors that there are for walls. And I think if you stick around for the next session, we're going to dive into the different type of resins that we're using, so you'll get a better understanding of why we use a floor paint compared to a wall paint, and so forth.
Sounds great. And one real quick thing is that for those of you who join late, we're going to go through the material and take questions if we have time at the end, because there's a lot of material to cover. And if your question is not answered on the air, a full report of all the questions will get to Rudy afterwards. So you will have your answer one way or the other. Please go on. Okay, terrific. The other part that you need to consider when you're doing any kind of a project on your community is understand the construction lien law in the state of Florida. Again, it's important to consult with an attorney on this, but what I have found over the years is that the lien laws are very, very misunderstood by all parties, by painting contractors, by boards, and so forth, and by suppliers. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the lien law. The lien law is not, it's really made there to protect the community, to protect you from overpaying. But it's not a reflection on the integrity or the quality of a painting contractor or the history of a painting contractor. A lot of contractors don't like to work with it, but it really just protects it, because if you read and understand the lien law, there are different things that you could do to, for instance, if a contractor does not pay their supplier, the association or the building is responsible for paying that supplier if that material was used on that job. If the material was shipped to that job with invoices, you could be responsible for paying for it. So again, it's a law. It's we're talking about notices to things like notice to owner and releases. I don't want to get a lot into this, because again, I'm not an attorney and I don't want to say a lot of things on there, but when you're going through and understand and considering a paint project, understand what is the lien law, and understand, that it's important, especially for the community and the building, to be able to get releases of lien from the contractor and from your suppliers that are putting work on your community, so that you as a community don't have to repay anything. And again, this is just a process for protection. It doesn't talk about any kind of integrity on the contractors or the suppliers at all.
It's just a kind of a valid part. Again, this is a very misunderstood part of the process that we use when painting. People get very upset when they see notices of owners being sent, but it doesn't mean anything other than just, hey, we want to protect everybody in this process. And as the end user that are using it, understanding and getting those releases from the suppliers for the work being done on your building from any industry, not just paint, from any industry, from roofing to structural work and so forth. It's important to be able to get these releases of lien. So that way you don't have to, you won't be liable to pay a second time. So it's important to be able to understand that. So again, not enough time is spent on lien laws, and it's misunderstood. So I can't say enough to understand the lien laws and work with it and understand what they mean. And an attorney will tell you, but generally most of the time you don't need an attorney putting liens together, doing anything other than just making sure that you get your releases of lien. And a notice to owner doesn't mean, it's the way that you start to get a notification that there will be a lien put on your property. And trust me, even if you refuse to pay a lien, a lot of times we've had buildings that they've had liens on and they've ended up just having to pay because, in a building, if you're selling 1 or 2 units, you have to be able to pay. You're going to have to be able to, to satisfy that lien, or at least a portion of that lien for that particular unit. So it's a nice thing just to make sure you have that taken out of the way to make sure. All right, structural safety. And again, in light of the unfortunate issues that we've seen in Surfside this year, structural safety is, especially for condominium buildings, and you have to take this in consideration for homes as well. If for single family homes and 2-story homes, it's a very, very important part of the industry. This is a lot of the protection that I talk about in my other CEUs, and we talked a little bit about before, is the fact that you need to protect the structural integrity of your building. It's a fiduciary responsibility of the board. I think we're going to be hearing a lot more of those words coming out in the future here, especially as the understanding of the changes in the building certification is going to happen. Education is going to be your best defense on this. Understand, work with people. You're not going to be able to, especially now after what's happened. Ignorance is not going to be an option. You're going to have to be able to do the changes. You're going to have to, we talked about the changes in the building code that are coming. One of the best things that you need to do this, don't try to figure this out on your own, especially if you have a building. It's not worth the effort. And especially if we're working with these building codes, try to have a go-to professional, either an architect and or a structural engineer for your buildings, to be able to understand the risks. And when you're putting your reserve studies together, you'll probably have to refer back to an architect or to a structural engineer to be able to tell you what kind of a lifespan or expected lifespan that a building will have until you have to start going after some of these things. So again, it's an important part to be able to understand that. But when you're doing a painting, that is usually what triggers at least to be able to take a look at the structural safety of the building at that time. Because if you do have to do any repairs, painting is going to be a way that's going to protect those areas that are repaired and make the building look, like it has not been repaired at all. So again, in the long term, the preventive maintenance is going to prolong the lifespan of the items on the building itself, and it's probably going to end up being more cost effective for you and the community in the long run. And again, as we've learned, life safety issues should always be given top priority. There's just no way around that. We have to be able to think other than that at this point. So if you're going to be having some issues with, you're going to have some, you look at someone that's going to be understanding to tell you some information regarding the structural safety of your building, then at that point, you really have to start to look at and think about selecting a structural engineer. When I started in the paint business way back when, one of the things that, one of the things that we used to have is that there weren't a whole lot of older buildings in, but there were a few. But there was some contractors that would do restoration, or general contractors, but there was really no one to kind of guide that contractor what to do. And a lot of times I've been to the point where I've actually, unfortunately, seen contractors break balconies that don't need to be broken just so they could add to the cost of the building. So to the cost of the contractor. So that's why the structural engineer industry is right now a booming industry. It's going to become even more important moving forward here. But the biggest thing, just like when you're picking contractors, how do you pick the right one? How do you pick the right contractor for your community? How do you pick the right one that's going to be able to work with you? And I'm going to tell you that there's really there's no real kind of science on how to be able to do that when you're picking contractors, but you do have a lot of resources to work from. The first ones you're going to have, of course, is your property managers, the people that are running your building, past experiences with other buildings. That is one of the ways you do it. But when you do need a structural engineer to be able to tell you what the issue is, there are certain questions that you need to ask, and you could use the internet for references and so forth. But look at you could even use suppliers like myself to be able to reference you some engineers that we've worked with in the past that has some good reputations. But some of the questions you need to ask when you're selecting a structural engineer is, hey, are they licensed? What is their specialty when you're doing what is their specialty? Because some structural engineers just don't do building maintenance. They do a little bit of everything on this. So you have to look at that. Make sure you ask them if they understand what the local ordinances are. It's their responsibility to be able to guide you through that. Are they insured for the work that they're going to be doing on there? And then if the paint committee decides that there's a timetable, can they meet that timetable? Unfortunately, right now the structural engineer is probably going to be one of the most popular people in the room, so to speak. And a lot of engineers, I know of a couple that are booked out already a year to 2 years ahead. And this is before Surfside. So after that, there's a lot of panic going on. So they're going to be booked out a lot more. And I think, the panic is, for the most part, sometimes it's something to be concerned about, but I think the buildings are usually in a little bit better shape than you think, but you do need to have a good understanding and clear on that. But other things you need to do is, can you get an estimate on the project or how much it's going to cost to be able to do that? And then one of the things engineers do a little bit different, are they going to help run the entire project? Are they going to be managing the construction part for you and the painting part? Is there going to be a charge for doing that on that part? But again, you're using information there from the paint part. Some engineers would want to use their own painting, their own paint specifications when putting a building together. But at the same time, the warranties, and we'll talk about the warranties, come from the manufacturer. So it's a good idea to be able to use, especially on the paint warranty, the instructions from a paint manufacturer, because as a paint manufacturer, I don't want to have a problem on your building later on down the road. So it's important at that point to be able to use the instructions that a paint manufacturer wants for applying the coating itself. We don't get involved in the construction part of it. That's their specialty. So that's one thing that they'll have to do. So it's things, again, you want to be able to look at. Are there some companies that are going to actually want to be able to only buy from a certain paint store or for a certain manufacturer? Are you as a community comfortable with that? For instance, if you have a paint store selling the same material 2 miles from your store, or that you're comfortable because they're comfortable working with a certain paint store that's 40 to 50 miles away, are you as a paint committee going to be, as a board, going to be comfortable with that? Or do you want to have the ability and flexibility to be able to work like that? So a lot of different questions to ask, and so forth. So it's different things different questions you have to ask on there. The important thing is to do the research, investigate everyone, use your suppliers, use the people that the work with previous engineers. And a little thing that what you want to do is, most of the people you're going to be talking to when you're interviewing a structural engineer might be the owner or salesperson. And the same thing goes for when you're working with contractors. Speak and try to interview, when you're doing an interview with a structural engineer, have the foreman or the person that's going to be running your job at that interview, because the person that you're going to be speaking to on a day-to-day basis as you're going through your project is going to be that particular person. And if there's going to be a personality conflict, even though they have a contract, is a personality conflict is a real important part of making sure that your community is having a job done correctly. And it just, again, doing a project like this is tremendously inconvenient for everyone. So the last thing you need to have is an issue with the, with the project manager, from communication to attitudes, but just a better understanding what you're going through. So it's a good idea to go through that. So again, real important part. The other part that you want to talk about, whoops, let me go back here, color. And I know this is something that nobody wants to talk about in your community, but some of the things that you have to understand when you're working with color. First of all, do your residents want an update? And that's kind of the first thing. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Color is a real important part on aesthetics. It helps, it will affect the value of your property, always does. So you have to kind of keep that on there. But when you want a color change, you have to understand, first of all, some of the questions that you have to ask is, do your docs say that you can change colors, number one? And then number two, if it says it can, what is the percentage or the number of homeowners that is required to allow that color change? Now, some communities, docs are different all over the place. Some have no conversation about the changing colors. Others do, saying they need up to a 75 to 80% vote towards changing color. So again, that's something that you kind of have to be able to understand. Understand whether the city or the master association needs to approve if you're there. Concrete work and patchwork is going to affect all that. You have to understand things like what is the fixed color or fixed colors on anything that's not changing, like light fixtures, light poles, and so forth like that. Lanterns, pavers, stone and tiles, metal enclosures, tinted glass. That adds a lot to what colors on there. Storm shutters. I've seen a lot of buildings that don't take the storm shutters in consideration, and all of a sudden they have a real nice white, kind of grayish looking building, but we have a kind of pinkish looking storm shutters, which blended in before based on previous colors. So those are the things you have to kind of keep into consideration. So the whole thing when you're doing all this, and again, we're talking about a lot of work, but trust me, color is the most emotional part of any project you're going to do in your building, especially if you're going to change. Having a color committee is really important piece. I know you have the paint committee, but having a color committee is really important to be able to study the color so that they can present it to the paint committee and or to the board for future colors. We have found that it works best if we're able to do that. So again, the other things you take in consideration, you're going to have to use, the color changes are going to be expensive. They're usually going to require one more coat of paint. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. They're usually going to require one more coat of paint because paint is not guaranteed one coat coverage. So you have to kind of keep that in consideration. And then when there are certain colors, even though that you go to a store and says, hey, all these colors could be used outside, there's certain pigments and certain colors that will hold up better outside than others. And if fading is considered normal wear and tear on all paint warranties, make sure that the colorants that you're using are the colorants that are going to hold up better outside. So it's a real important piece to be able to do that, and to be able to use that. Again, the rule of thumb here: the darker the color, the more change that you're going to see on that color, regardless of what pigment you use on there. The lighter the color, the less change you're going to see. So everything fades outside, especially in our community. So nothing is free from that. A good example of that. Imagine your car. You leave it parked in one place for 8 to 10 years, or whatever time you're going to consider for your next repaint. You're going to, in 8 to 10 years, and what's going to happen to that car? The colors, again, and that's the material used in that car is a better quality paint that's used on buildings. So kind of imagine what it'll try to do. So that's an important piece. And then the difference between a color consultation and color rendering, even if you got a color committee, a color consultation is where we bring in a professional, a designer or professional that's used to doing this, to be able to help the community pick colors and be able to understand color a little bit more. And the color rendering is essentially, and a lot of these are either sometimes put together or one is not needed over another. And the color rendering is essentially taking a photograph of the property or the building and putting different color schemes on it so you can get an idea of what it's going to look like. Understand though that color renderings The color renderings are, when you see something on a digital piece, they're always going to look a little bit different, than on when you actually see the colors. So always try to get some color samples on the substrate itself. Paint basics, and again, here, what you have to understand here with the paint committee when they're talking about this is understand the warranties about paint, understand the knowledge about the paint, what the components are of paint and the limitations in our community. And then I'm going to hit on two of the more popular topics that we run into when you're considering painting and using a painting contractor that you really have to kind of use. The first question I ask is that the first thing you can see is that usually on a paint job, we go with a coat of sealer and a coat of paint. A lot of contractors are going to say you don't need the seal, especially if you have no chalk on there. And I can't tell you that's anything further from the truth. And again, it's not about helping change, adding another coat of paint or more labor to a building. But a sealer, there's a lot of reasons why you want to use a sealer. First of all, if you do have some chalking, you clean, it's going to be able to seal some of that chalk that's down and help it bind on there. If you're changing colors, it could help on the color change, so it doesn't allow more coat on there. The most important piece, at least from my part for protection, is the fact that, if you have a building that's painted 8 to 10 years and you put a coat of paint on there, that coating is worn a little bit. So when you put another coat of paint of it, the solvent or the vehicle will tend to soak into the coating itself. So, you don't want, and then that takes away from the protection of that coating for your building. Coat of sealer takes that part and then allows the paint to lay on top and to be able to give your building the protection and the color to hold up the best on it. So it's a really, it's really important piece to be able to do that. A lot of times you'll see a contractor don't want to put sealer on there, and simply because they're trying to save money on labor, and labor is generally the most expensive part of the cost of any job. And understand though that the sealer is you'll use about 1 gallon of sealer for every 4 to 5 gallons of paint that you use. So it's a real light way, but it will make a big difference when you're painting your community. One coat coverage, you have to understand that. One coat coverage is not guaranteed by any manufacturer. Nobody guarantees it. The applicator has to be responsible for it, because how they put the paint on is going to go a long ways to determine. When you're changing colors, most of the time, most manufacturers are going to ask for 1 coat of sealer and 2 coats of paint. However, always refer to your painting contractor to guarantee that. So that's important part, is to know your colors before you select a painting contractor, so that, to be fair to them, you could give them the colors that you want, so they could tell you whether it's going to need a coat or a coat of sealer, an extra coat of paint, or just 1 and 1. And a coat of paint and a coat of sealer is generally what we give as a painting manufacturer. The other part too is pick a paint manufacturer before you pick a painting contractor. A lot of manufacturers, the warranties come from the manufacturer. We should be the ones that are going to tell the community how to paint. We need to be the ones that tell the contractor how to paint, and to give that instructions. And then when you get the painting contractor specifications, which are the instructions on repainting, it kind of really allows you to be able to tell the painter how to paint. Your bids will come in using one particular product, and that way you'll be able to compare apples to apples, and make sure that you demand that the contractor or the engineer uses those paint specifications in their contract. So that way there's not a whole bunch of interpretations, because trust me, if you go with 5 different contractors' prices, they're going to have 5 different ideas on how to paint. And if the manufacturer is given the warranty, shouldn't we be the ones that are doing that? And then also, one of the things about that is a lot of manufacturers have a lot of different things that they could do for you and so forth, from record keeping, to offering free color rendering and color and so forth like that. So, and to do inspection. So it's a big important piece to get that first before you start getting into what the painting contractor is going to do. The next piece after that, when you're moving forward with the project, is, again, now that you've got your structure, you've got all your other pieces put together, how do you pick a restoration and or a painting contractor? And of course, the restoration contractor is going to depend on what the structural engineer tells you. A lot of restoration contractors these days do both the contract, the work of doing the concrete work, along with the painting. So again, you have to kind of ask each one. The most important piece on there is just to make sure that, these contractors are licensed. And again, the same things, the kind of questions you ask when you're about the engineer, from licensing to specialties and their understanding, local ordinances, and get referrals from previous customers, of suppliers, and the internet to be able to work with and to be able to ask when you're doing that. When you get proposals from your contractors, is make sure that they're using the proposals from the manufacturer that you selected. Don't allow them to put in their interpretation. Don't allow them to put in their scope. Most painting specifications are going to have a scope. In other words, what areas are going to be painted, what areas are not going to be painted, and make sure that the contractor follows that. So that way, when you get the bids in, contractors don't like to do that. They like to make a change. That way, you'll be able to, as a board or as a paint committee, you'll be able to make smarter choices and actually do better comparisons between one and the other if everyone's using the same format. It's really important to do that. Referrals are good only if you call them. You don't know how many times I get referrals, and of course, the customer is always going to give their best referrals. But I've seen a lot of times when we've actually put in a call for a referral, and the contractor gets slammed because the contractor haven't followed up on there. So again, it's just real things to be able to do. And the same thing is when you're picking a structural engineer. If you're going to, once you start getting into the interview, ask for that foreman or supervisor that's going to be running the project to be at that interview. Again, it's not something a lot of contractors like to do, but it really helps in understanding and making sure that who you're going to be working with on a day-to-day basis is not going to be the salesperson that's going to be selling you that project itself. Some of the questions to ask, there's a ton of questions. I could send you a list of this afterwards, but be ready to ask questions and have a prepared list of questions to ask so you could go through them and ask the same ones for each contractor. Questions like, could you meet the timeline that we have? When do you expect to commence the project? Always ask who, what, where, and why questions, and how, whenever possible. Ask about the size of the crew, how much they're going to be able to get accomplished. The requirements for storage, for laboratories, the painting process that they're going to be using. One of the things that you'll have to understand is that most of these foremen, and this is why I like to have a foreman on the interview, is that most of these foremen, when they're doing the work, they've never seen a copy of the specification. So they've never seen, the salesman and contract says it, but a lot of times the foremen don't see that. So it's a good idea for them to have that there so they can have a reference of the products to be used, the processes to be followed. So as we're going to go through here in a minute, as the interview process, as the inspection process goes through, there's no questions on how to do that. So again, I want to remind you that the only dumb question is the one that's not asked, and that's an important piece. So there's just a ton of questions, but again, if you'd like to have a list of these questions, let me know, and I'll be more than happy to forward them to you on there. The other piece is
based on what Rudy just said. If you want any of the materials he's talking about, put it into the survey at the end. Put it in field number 10. Request anything else that's in addition to the slides, and Rudy will make sure you get them. Back to you.
Okay, not a problem. And then project management. This is really the most important parts for a successful project. Everybody who could get involved in a painting project or engineering product is important, especially board members, committee members, or property manager, along with everyone else. And you have to decide that from the beginning, but it just kind of helps make sure that things are done properly, they're executed, and everything is being followed. Because just because something's written down on a contract or a specification doesn't mean that it's going to be followed verbatim. But by doing regular project management, by doing inspections, you're able to get past that. And one thing that you're going to understand, every job has an issue. Every job has an unforeseen circumstance. It's important to be able to have that relationship and the procedure established on how to handle those issues when they come up. The good contractors, the good engineers all have a process, and they will work through with you on there. A pre-job meeting is essentially that. Again, before the job starts, make sure everybody's on the same page, that we all understand the roles that everybody's going to have in the project management piece. And again, the more you get involved, the better, and the quality of the work is coming through, and the better you're going to be able to explain to your board if an issue does come up. Inspections, we talked about that. Again, these are usually scheduled on a regular basis, weekly basis, but it's a good time to check in on the progress, check in on any issues, so forth, and to be able to get a better understanding so that the board or the committee member, the property manager, can explain to the property. Because again, these projects become really inconvenient for the homeowners. So being able to understand that and go through there is a real important part of going through these pieces there. And then at the end, of course, finalizing the product, the project, a final inspection, get your final release of liens, get your warranties issued. Are there any lingering issues? Where you're going to be able to get paint left over, to be able to touch up your job. Record keeping, who's going to keep the record? A lot of suppliers will keep records for you. Where could those records be accessed? A lot of suppliers will actually give the homeowners for your building and community some discounts if you're part of it. So that's, again, part of it. And then the main part, paint doesn't last forever. So you're going to need some maintenance. So it's always a good idea to try to keep, have a maintenance plan set up after it's painting, so that as issues do come up and problems come up, you have a maintenance plan from the store or you're getting the material from, and even from the contractor, of how they're going to come back to keep up. So essentially, and again, whoops, went the wrong way here. And then start the process for the next job. You start it right away. As soon as you finish, go, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, understand paint doesn't last forever. Nobody makes a paint that lasts forever. It would, I'd be out of a job, but paint doesn't last forever, especially in our community. So keep everything that you did in a digital file nowadays, so that it could be accessed by future boards and committee members. It's the right thing to do. It'll make the project a lot easier for you to do. And then, as a paint committee, if you do set one up, work through this plan and set up the steps and kind of the steps you do. Because again, it's going to be planning for the future. It's just a fiscally responsible thing for the community to do. And if you're able to do it with and you budget it appropriately, you're going to have a lot less surprises and you're going to have a lot better project done. So other than that, that's the first part of the presentation. So thank you. If you have any questions, like Jeff's saying, by all means, we have some questions up there. We could, get into a little bit of those right now.
Yeah, we have a few. One of them is from very early on from one of our viewers. What is covered by the warranty? It looks like not everything is covered.
No, and that's, yeah. Again, as I stated, generally, when you're doing the exterior paint job, the paint on the masonry surfaces are what's covered. Metal, wood, floors, too tough of a substrate. But there's a lot of issues that could come up that are not the fact of paint. So the majority of manufacturers, in fact, all manufacturers I know of, will not warranty those surfaces.
Okay. And again,
even though they give you the impression that they will. So
even the impression, yes, yeah. They want to keep that hook, the meat hook.
Yep, absolutely.
End of the fishing pole. We have a question from Teresa. How many members are required to form a paint committee? The reason I ask is our finding committee requires a minimum of 3. So I'm guessing that's a documents question.
Yeah, again, I don't think there's any kind of a law on there. I generally like to say at least 3, 3 to 5. And again, it's hard to get volunteers, and it's going to be harder to get volunteers in the future. But volunteers is going to be, I would say a minimum of 3 people to spread it out. Yep.
Got to break that tie. Exactly. Got to have
absolutely.
Mark asks, how often should pressure washing on a building take place?
Actually, the pressure washing is part of the preparation of a building itself. It's not a bad idea through, say, if you have an 8 to 10 year cycle in paint, pressure wash your buildings, at least maybe once during that period to help it keep cleaner. For my home, myself, I like to pressure wash lightly, at least once a year, once every 18 months. It just keeps things looking better, makes my paint job look a lot better.
Exactly. Teresa asks, does a surety bond help if a painting company does not complete the job and pay its subcontractors?
Yeah, again, yes, but at the same time, that adds to the cost of a job. So you have to kind of balance, is it worth it to be able to do something like that? So,
and this one, this is kind of a general question. Terry asks, how could we verify the paint company is using the correct paint?
Well, that's part why you have, the relationships with these paint, with the inspection committees and so forth. Manufacturers, for instance, when I do an inspection, I'm always asking to make sure that what is the products that are being purchased at the store, because I don't want an issue. I don't want to have, if I'm issuing a 10-year warranty and they're using 8-year warranty, I don't want to know that at the end of the job. I'm going to know that during the process of the job. And in the inspection process, you'll be able to discover that and look at the material actually being used.
Right. Okay. Ralph asks, what should be done before painting with respect to waterproofing and filling cracks? I think you mentioned that a little bit earlier.
Yeah. Again, as part of the painting process is,
Right.
cracks need to be treated, they need to be sealed up, and they need to be closed up. So, and they need to be sealed. So it's important, to seal a crack before you put any kind of a patch on there. Caulking is a real important part of any paint project.
Okay. And Barbara asks about the qualifications for a project manager. You addressed that earlier. So Barbara, put that into your evaluation, and Rudy can get more in depth into that because we're pressed for time. Great question, but he did touch upon it a little bit earlier.
Okay.
Another question for Christina. Where do we go for paint consultation? Same kind of thing. Please put that in your evaluation, and Rudy can address that.
Yep.
But he touched upon that earlier about consultation. Having somebody who has no stake in the actual work can help you save
Right.
some money in the long run. Correct?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, we had that with a roofer at my place. We had a roofing company who did nothing but cover ourselves so that the contractor wouldn't screw the community, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
So Trevor asks, will the paint supplier develop bid specs if the paint supplier is selected first?
Well, we could, as a paint supplier, I don't get involved with the bidding process because, again, I have an interest with contractors, so I don't want to know what their prices are. I will get involved in helping choose contractors, but asking the certain kind of questions and making sure you ask the certain kind of questions, and based on the relationship we've had with them.
Right.
But again, we can solicit contractors to be able to give you proposals, but usually I always ask for them to be sealed and taken directly to the paint committee, the property manager, whoever's making the decision.
Cool. Okay, we have a question here. I don't know if we can answer this one.
Okay.
How do you deal with a board that refuses to provide contract documents for a current painting project that's happening? That's something probably more suited for your associate counsel.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. That's above my pay grade to be able to give an answer on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I did stay at a hotel recently, a Holiday Inn recently.
Okay.
But given the weather in South Florida, is there a better time of the year to paint?
Not necessarily. I mean, generally, always you'd like to paint when, you'd like to paint during the dry season because contractors are less interrupted. But all coatings from all the manufacturers, they're made to be put in South Florida. There's not, there's a couple there's a manufacturer out there says, oh, we're made in Florida, we're better paint. No, we're not. Everybody tests their paint. We have experience with paint. A good acrylic coating outside needs about an hour and a half before it's rained on for it not to be bothered. So as long as, and most contractors working in South Florida understand that. We all look at our weather reports in the morning to see what we're going to be able to do. And as long as you get about an hour, you're good to go. You don't really have to worry about it.
That's great. We'll do two more questions, and we're going to give a little window time for the second portion to begin, which is our CE credit course. So there's a couple more questions in the queue. So if you type any more questions from this point on, they will be addressed via email by Rudy, because we're just going to take the 2 or 3 that are on here now. So anything new we'll do afterwards to allow time for the next presentation to begin. So the next one is, how do I get a copy of this? So on the evaluation, there were buttons to download both sets of slides, from the one Rudy just finished and the one that's about to take place for CE credit. So you can download the slides there. So that's Anna answering your question there. Sherry asks, how much does the grade of the paint affect life expectancy?
It does. It affects quite a bit. I mean, that's why there's a difference between you could use a paint that costs $20 a gallon, use a paint that costs $60 a gallon. We're not making extra money on paint. There's a quality standard to it, and there's certain benefits. Best thing to do is to talk to us as a paint manufacturer, and I'll be able to give you the benefits and see if that outweighs the cost of what is going to be involved in doing that. But the cost of a job, about 15-20%. So, the labor, regardless if you use the $20 can of paint or the $60 can of paint, is the same. If it's not the same, then you have the wrong contractor. But the labor is going to stay consistent. The product cost is really on any job should be where it's going to be different.
Okay, good stuff. If you have any parting words, that completes our Q&A field.
Yeah.
I have no further questions.
Sure. Again, absolutely. This is an industry that I've been with since I was 16 years old. Obviously I'm doing this. I would love to be a part of. If you're considering a painting process, I would love to be a part of it. Again, we have a lot of experience in the market. We work with a lot of people with a lot of high integrity. I base myself personally on high integrity in my own personal life. So I like to extend that when I'm working with my customers and end users. So if you need any questions on this or any kind of assistance on this, by all means, feel free to come to me and call on me at any time. I'll be more than happy to help you out.
Sounds great. And for those of you, Rudy, don't go anywhere. We need you for another hour.
Got it.
Terry,
Not a problem.
I'll go for you in just a second. I just want to mention a couple of folks are mentioning that on the evaluation, they didn't see where to download the presentation. At the top of the evaluation page, there are 2 buttons. Each button says click here to download the slides for the first presentation. The second button says click here to download the slides for the second presentation. That's where you click to download them. When that PDF opens up, you can choose to just view it, or you can download it and save it and have it forever and ever and ever. Put it in that cloud Rudy mentioned earlier for a future board.
Right. And at the same time, if you have any kind of issue, let me know. I'll be more than happy to email it to you as well.
And Heidi asks, where is the evaluation? That comes up at the end. When you leave, you'll get a redirect link. You click on that link, a window will open, you fill out the evaluation. In addition, there'll be a follow-up email that goes out tomorrow morning to everybody who attended. So that link for the evaluation will appear there as well. So you have several opportunities to get it. I see somebody, I'll also put it into the chat a little bit later. I'll put both links into the chat just to play it safe in case anybody has any issues with pop-ups on your.
And Jeff, I have people to the people that are attending. I have thick skin. This is the first time I did that presentation. So by all means, go at me. I've been married for 32 years. So, if I have that long, you got to have thick skin. So
and when Rudy rips off his shirt, he's got the big S on there, the big.
Yeah, no.
So Terry, you have to unmute yourself. If you have anything to say, we have 2 minutes before we get started with the CAM presentation, with the CE credit presentation. But Terry, you're muted. Go ahead and unmute yourself, my friend.
Am I unmuted?
Now we got you.
Rudy, thanks so much. That was great. We did lots of practice. I have a few questions, but I'm going to save them for later.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody. That was really great. And we're going to now move on to our other program. But I want to remind everyone that on Friday, we're going to have what Rudy suggested is a presentation on association reserves, which is the first thing Rudy told us to do for a paint job. And we're going to help everybody with that. So if you'd like, I'm sure Jeff is going to tell you, if you don't already have the flyer, how to sign on for association reserves. And
Terry,
that,
what again, I want to reemphasize, and again, hate to interrupt.
That's
a painting project, if you're planning to paint 6 months from now, you really need to have started planning that project at least a year or 2 years before that, incorporating into reserve study and so forth. So, we can paint a project tomorrow if you want, but planning it out, just make sure that, like you said, it just makes sure you're budgeted right. You're spending the money where you need to spend it. I've had jobs where we paint the building and then the restoration comes 6 months later, then they have to repaint the building. If they did the reserve study, they would have been able to understand that.
Right. So plan to be with us on Friday. Will Simon is the top in the field of association reserves, and they do a great job, and they'll have a lot of materials for you. So if you can see that paint job coming in the future, it's time to call Will and get ready, and then Rudy. So with that, we'll get started, Jeff, with the second part. Are you ready for that? People are signing in. I can see we have some more people signing in for the second part.
Yeah, no problem. Let me bring it up. Okay, can everybody see that?
Gotcha.
We got it. Okay. All right. Again, the paint technology. One of the reasons we like to do this course is that, as I was talking previously, understanding what you're going to be using, understanding the environment that we're working with, and understanding what paint does and what kind of paint is just going to lead you to more information and make better choices when you're selecting a contractor, when you're selecting a paint manufacturer, and you're going through that reserve study or the budgeting to understand the life expectancy of what the responsible life expectancy of what a coating should do for your property, regardless of which manufacturer you're using. It's all facts, it's all issue. At the end of the day, These are the the numbers that we're going to be going through. Please fill out that survey at the end and make sure the certificate. Generally, what I do is that I have my office send everything in to get certified with to get your credits with the state of Florida. We generally do not send out certificates unless you ask for one. If you need a certificate, by all means, please email me and I'll be more than happy to supply you with a certificate on there. But for us, we want to make sure, especially when we're working digitally, that we get you on the, that we get your credits certified with the state of Florida. Okay. All right. What we're going to be doing over here, what we're going to be talking about today is that generally paints provide both a decorative and, most importantly, a protective barrier on your substrates. Paint performance is influenced by the quality of the ingredients and by using the correct product and the correct finish for the application that you're using. There's in our line alone, we have close to about 4,000 to 5,000 SKUs, different individual units. So we wouldn't do that unless we had to. It'd be a lot easier to manage one line, but it's impossible to do that because every product, every need has a different cost and a different use for the product. And there's not one product that will fit all needs on there. So in this program, we're going to talk about components of paint. We're going to talk about some finishes, and we're going to talk about some of the latest technology. It is a longer presentation, so I want to make sure that I'm done on time. So I am going to be running through this fairly quickly, but at the end, at this program, you should be able to explain the different functions of the 4 components of paint and their impact on performance. We're going to talk on this part. Why does a can of paint cost $20? Why does a can of paint cost $60 when you're still getting a can of paint? So this will be a part of it. Understand the difference between aesthetic and the functional features of the coating. Describe what I do in the specification process, and of course, we'll talk a little bit about some of the latest technology, benefits of the latest technology and process. So
type your questions using the Q&A icon at the bottom at any time. And then if we have time towards the end, Rudy will get to them. And if not, we'll make sure he receives a report of all the questions answered and unanswered so he can get back to you. So okay. Rudy, back to you.
Got it. All right. So the purpose of coatings, again, we all think that a lot of it is aesthetics, and it leads a lot that monetarily wise. Painting is, the main reason why everybody wants to paint. They want their property to look good. Adds to the value, adds to the cost, adds to just the enhancement or just the look of the community, make people want to live there. But again, I want to emphasize the reason you want to paint in South Florida, the number one reason should be protection of the substrates, whether it's a building or whether it's a home. You want to understand the most important part is to be able to do that. The labor of using a cheap can of paint to using an expensive can of paint is the same if they're doing it right, if the contractor is doing it right. So protection to me is going to just always be number one priority in the years that I've been selling quite a bit of paint. So there's different kind of quality, different type of paints. There's architectural, industrial, and special purpose. We're really going to be, most of the stuff what you're going to be using on your community is going to be architectural coatings, some industrial and some special coatings, but generally architectural coatings what you'll be using. Architectural coatings are generally used for these type of areas, residential, public buildings, and so forth. But that's where architectural coatings are generally used for itself. Industrial coatings are made for extreme conditions. Generally, you see a lot of industrial coatings used on metal tanks, like what you see in the picture here. Areas where you have chemical exposure, a lot of corrosion. When you get into, we use industrial coatings on your buildings, especially in garages or in the metal pipes where we need that corrosion resistance. It's a real important piece of that for safety purposes, of course, for helps in the integrity of the building, but then color notification as well. Some areas need to be specialized in colors. And then we have all kinds of other coatings that are made. Most of these things we're not going to run into, maybe a little bit into traffic marking coatings and so forth, but everything that has a color to it has a coating on it. So there's a lot of different multiple manufacturers that make all kinds of stuff on their bench, for different surfaces. Benjamin Moore generally deals with architectural coatings. We have a full line of industrial coatings as well as some of the special coatings itself. All right, to get a better understanding of paint coatings, there's 4 basic components to paint, to any can of paint, regardless of what you got. Making a can of paint is not, there's not a secret to it. Again, paint has been around forever. You know, you've seen the cavemen, when they put little designs on the walls that are 40, 50, 100,000 years old. That essentially is paint. So it's been around for a very long time. The basic components of paint are going to be these 4. Is going to be the pigments, the resins, additives, and solvents. We're going to get a little bit more into each of them so you can understand the value of using the value put into each one. And this is where the cost factors change in a can of paint. The quality of the pigment, the kind of pigments, the resins, the quality of the resins you use, the additives, and so forth. Those 3 first ones really kind of determine what the can of paint is. And a competitive nature, if you've got a can of paint selling for $60 a gallon and one for 20, and you're still getting a can of paint, it's going to be different. It's going to be a different, it's like buying a $2 chuck bottle of wine compared to a bottle of wine that cost $50. The quality, everything is going to be different. So what goes in is what really determines the cost. And the solvents, we'll talk about that and tell you what it is. So what do pigments do? Pigments generally give you the hide. When you see something that's painted, you're generally seeing the pigment. You're seeing it gives you the hide of the color. It gives you the color that you're seeing itself, and it's going to give you some protection on the substrate itself. So, you know, you're going to see some protection with the pigment itself because it's going to help, you know, protect the substrate from sun and so forth like that. So you have to understand that. There's generally 5 types of pigments that are used in coatings. And again, I could talk about this all day long, and I'm sure all of you are excited to hear about that, but we got to keep it under an hour. So general type of pigments that you're going to be using, and this is how we balance costs in a can of paint. There's prime white, or what we call titanium dioxide. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Then there's the color, there's inert extenders, and then metallic and specialty pigments that we put in to give different purposes. And we're going to touch a little bit on that as we go forth. Prime white, essentially, this is the most, you know, kind of the most expensive part of the pigment that you're going to be using. Titanium dioxide is the primary tint that's used with the primary pigment that's used. That gives you the whiteness. It's going to give you the color that you're going to be using, and the high opacity. Titanium dioxide is generally white. When you have something white, the more titanium dioxide you have in it, the more the whiter or the better it's going to cover. However, understand that titanium dioxide is the most expensive can of paint. So just because you see a white can of paint, all paints contain titanium dioxide, but there's different levels and qualities of titanium dioxide as well, which helps us kind of factor in when we're building a formula for a product to be able to, you know, to kind of get the price point that you or the market is going to be able to understand. So titanium dioxide, again, it's a widely used pigment. Again, it gives you that whiteness with the white, what you see, the opacity for cover. And we mean by opacity, the hide and coverage you can be able to see on there. It gives you some resistance to chemicals and to ultraviolet light. But like I said, it is the most expensive part about it. When the color that you're going to be seeing, there's two essential types of colorants that are used. They're what we call, they come from organic places or the organic or synthetic processes. They could come from plants, animals, or synthetic sources. You're usually going to see the colors that are called organic are going to be the real bright, pretty colors, you know, that you see, you know, that are used. They tend to, we were talking about in the previous presentation where you get the right, you know, check the pigments that are being used. Organics really give you color. They're really pretty, but nature is generally not real bright colors. And that's where inorganic compounds come from. The inorganic colorants, they come from natural resources, like from clay and from different minerals. Obviously, the more inorganic tints that you can use in a can of paint or in a color is going to hold up better in fade resistance than if you're using organic tints. So if you see a real pretty pink and on the outside of a house, or this time say pink, but say yellow, real pretty yellow, it's real bright. Those don't tend to last as long as, say, a yellow that has what we call a little dirt to it or a little dirty to it, because again, they come from the natural compounds, and they will not fade as fast as other as the organic colorants will. However, all colorants will fade outside, especially in our market. Again, color pigments is how we see color, but they vary in strength and opacity. Some colors cover better, and again, how the colors cover, it's kind of a unique way that we see colors, but colors covered by opacity or by how much the light absorbs the colorant. But at the same time, some colorants like yellows and real pretty reds and so forth don't do a good job in covering. So a lot of times you have to be able to do that. And again, some of them are reactive to to chemicals and water. Most paint that are as they're being manufactured, they're going to be manufactured using powder coatings. A lot of the times you'll see in the store, there's hardly any more ready mixed colors when you go to a paint store of any kind. Most of the time you see the tint machine where they add liquid tints to it to be able to get the color, and all of that is just because of inventory. But that's generally how paint is made. But again, if you see a white, those are usually that titanium dioxide used and manufactured at the warehouse itself. The industry itself and the paint industry has seen a lot of changes in the colorant part of the industry. You'll see most of the colorants now that are being used are what we call waterborne colorants. They tend to have a little bit lower VOC or volatile organic compound or odor to it, a little bit more environmentally friendly. They tend to hold up a little bit better, and they add significantly to to the fade resistance of a color itself. Universal colorants are the old standard that's been around since the 1930s and 40s, where they could be used in oil-based paints and oil-based paints and water-based paints. Industrial colorants, again, we'll get into the resins and so forth, but some resins need a certain kind of solvent. And then if you have a solvent of some kind, not the universal waterborne colorants will not work in it. So you need a colorant that is compatible with the solvent being used in that can of paint. So again, universal colorants are generally used in oil-based synthetic enamels and water paints. They contain glycols, and which usually gives them a lot of high VOCs to it. Darker colors, when using universal colorants, and even though there's a lot of universal colorants now that are low VOC, zero VOC, they generally still are going to be adding significantly to the odor or the volatile organic compounds to a can of paint. And just as a backup, a volatile organic compound is just a carbon compounds that are released into the atmosphere. Most everything that has any kind of a coating on it, or even plastics that are manufactured, release these organic compounds into the atmosphere. The government and the EPA that's where they try to change it. They're changing our industry a lot in the last 15 to 20 years, and that's where a lot of it is trying to be controlled. And the colorants that are being used and the solvents that are being used really affect the kind of colorants we could use. So that's where it's kind of a big play on the colorants and what we use. But it's just part of the process when using colorants. Waterborne colorants, again, are usually used just in water-based paints, and it used to be just latex, but now there's a lot of waterborne coatings. For instance, Waterborne Alkyds. Those are oil-based paints that use water as a solvent, and other waterborne coatings that are on there. Most of the time, waterborne colorants do not add any VOC or odor to the paint, which is compared to the universal colorants that are used itself. Industrial colorants, and again, these industrial colorants, like I mentioned before, they really determine, some solvents that are being used in these industrial coatings to achieve the protection you want on a particular substrate. Have solvents, and some of those, the waterborne or the universal colorants, just won't mix together. So we have to create an industrial colorant with a solvent that is compatible with the solvent. These generally are high in VOCs or in odor, and they add to the odor problems that you have with paint itself. So again, something you have to really kind of stick to. That's a lot about color pigment. Moving on to another pigment that we're doing is inert extenders. These extend a lot of what these do here. This is generally, in this particular, the inert extenders is really where the cost of a can of paint is generally determined. But a lot of the every can of paint generally is going to have inert extenders. You're generally not going to have 100% titanium dioxide tint pigment in a can of paint. Generally, it's going to be a combination. And this part adds again, they add to it, some durability. Gloss and sheen is determined by the amount of extenders we put into it and the scrubbability of the coating itself. So hide, and again, what you'll see here, what we're trying to do here is that the hide of paint is determined by the pigment that you're using. The primary pigment is titanium dioxide. That's generally the best kind of pigment to use. The extender pigments, things like calcium carbonate and talc, could be added to it, but you'll see what these drawdown kind of shows here is a coating used with titanium dioxide and then one used with calcium carbonate. You could see that the calcium carbonate really didn't add anything to the hiding of a coating itself. So generally you see some of the cheaper coatings have a lot of calcium carbonate to fill that can of paint, but they're not going to give you they're not going to add anything to the hide or the opacity of the coating itself. So that's where it's something you have to kind of be able to understand when you're using, again, the quality of the coating, and these are some of the things that you're going to tend to see. Metallic pigments, they're used for the performance and a lot of times for decorative attributes. For instance, aluminum is considered a metallic coating. That's a lot of coatings, and aluminum pigments are making it an effective sealant. They're used a lot on roofs. They're used a lot on asphalt, and again, it helps you kind of seal on there. Zinc has some anti-corrosive properties that we'll be able to use when we add the metallic coating to it. For instance, the galvanized metal fencing or galvanized coating that's used on galvanized metal is essentially a coating, and the zinc usually helps kind of what the design of the zinc in a coating is to protect the metal underneath that surface. So when you see galvanized metal, it's not that the metal is galvanized, it's generally just regular metal coated with a galvanized or zinc coating to give it a kind of help prevent that surface from rusting itself. Let me get back there. All right, and the next one, specialty. And again, this is where you add pigments to it, for instance, to give a paint a flame retardant. Of course, not every paint's going to have this, but there are coatings made specifically for that. Anti-foulings, essentially, if you've got generally anti-fouling coatings as a specialty pigment added to boat paint, especially underneath under the part that goes below the water. And the anti-fouling coatings help prevent kind of barnacles and weeds sticking to the bottom of a boat, which could slow down the speed and the efficiency of the boat itself. But there are all varieties of these type of pigments that we could get into, and you'll see very little of that itself. The biggest and most important part of the paint that I consider about the paint itself is the resin. Resin is essentially, you could refer to this a lot as binder as well, but this really kind of holds the pigment together. It's going to promote adhesion to the substrate, and it's going to help give you kind of the peeling. It's going to help resist peeling and the blistering and the cracking. It's going to give you, it's going to give you the type of flexibility that you need on a coating itself. It gives the characteristic to the paint itself. You'll find, and we're going to go over it in just a little bit, that the kind of resin that you use determines what is the name of the paint itself, and we're going to get into that in the next few slides. So, for instance, some of the typical resins that you're going to be seeing are going to be latex resins. You're going to be seeing alkyd resins. These generally are the two type of resins that you're going to be running into on your property or your homes as we paint. So those are the surface that you'll be looking at the most. So those are things that you want to, that you'll be running into itself. Latex resins are broken down to a wide variety. And again, a lot of it, we base it on cost, on the performance of the coating, what we need that coating to do, and how we need that coating to be able to do it. 100% acrylic resins are really popular today. They work very well on the outside. They're flexible. They adhere real well. But there are other coatings, again, all related to cost, where you have a latex resin like a vinyl, a PVA, vinyl acetate. We have some styrene acrylics, but within each of these categories themselves, there's different quality levels of resins as well. So again, when you put a formula together and you put something together, you're trying to be able to create the price to get the protection level or the need of what you're trying to achieve with that coating at a cost that's going to be effective. So again, when you keep going back to the $60 can of paint to a $20 can of paint, these areas, the resin, the pigment, and the quality levels within each are going to be able to do it. This, think about it like if you're driving a Lamborghini and you're driving a sport model of a much less expensive car. You've got four wheels, you've got an engine, but what goes into it, the quality of the products and so forth, the same thing that you run into when you're using different type of paints. 100% acrylic resins generally add to the interior. Again, they're used for interior exterior. They add to adhesion. A lot of 100% acrylic resins will give you a lot of UV resistance. They'll give you some alkali and efflorescence resistance to the coating itself. Most of the time, a coating, you'll see a lot of cans that say 100% acrylic resin. That means that just that portion of the resin is 100% acrylic. But again, price is going to, just because you have 100% acrylic resin doesn't mean it's better than another coating. And again, it's just depending on the quality and the amount of resin that's used in each kind of paint. So that kind of changes itself. One of the resins we talked about is, again, the polyvinyl acetate, PVAs. These are generally used on interior paints. They're generally they're generally a little bit cheaper than the 100% acrylics, but they do have some scrub resistance and they give you some good coverage, but doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a better quality coating. Styrene acrylics, a lot of these are used in masonry primers or in conjunction with 100% acrylic. And again, it gives you some of the ability for washability and for alkali burn and efflorescence itself. Some of the other pigments that we talk about, these are pieces of pigments that we will give a certain coating a different type of resistance or kind of an enhancement of a coating we want to do. For instance, there are some scuff resistant coatings in the market. So we add some pigments that add to the scuff resistance of coating. So in other words, where they won't mark up a surface or anything. Sometimes you need some chemical and some real hard abrasion resistance. So there's resins that are being used like epoxies and urethanes that will be able to give that. And then there's some low odor resins, a lot of what's being pushed by the EPA and a lot of the people that are being using the product in your communities, they want low odor products. They want low VOC, low odor products. Nobody wants to smell paint, especially if you're painting a home or an office interior. So you want these coatings on there. But again, whenever you need a particular performance or a low odor, it's generally a balance of trying to create, again, that's why you have so many different kinds of paints. It's trying to create the balance of putting this formula together, the coating to achieve what you're trying to get with the can of paint, from protection to aesthetics, to performance, to application, and to odor. So it's kind of a combination of trying to get the right combination together at the right price point and give you the durability that you're going to be needing on there. Oil-based paints are known generally as these are the four general types of resins that you're going to run into. Enhancements, I'll talk a little bit about that. Generally, oil-based paints are resins that come from natural resources, and they will generally require a solvent. For instance, like an alkyd paint will require paint thinner or mineral spirits to dissolve it or to clean brushes and so forth. One of the phenomena that we're starting to see a lot is that waterborne, you'll see the name Waterborne Alkyd. We'll talk a little bit about that. But these are the new technologies where manufacturers are taking latex paint or oil-based paints and getting the water to be used as the solvent with the coating, which adds a lot of enhancement. We'll talk about that. But in general, you'll find that oil-based paints, they dry harder, they do cure harder. So that's why they're still used today. And sometimes some of the oil-based paints will generally, because they take a little bit longer to dry, they'll give you less brush marks. And however, most of the time when you're using an oil-based paint, they're going to all amber with time. They're all going to yellow. For instance, if you paint white walls with a latex resin in the interior home, and you paint a door with an oil-based paint, even if you have some paint that are non-yellowing, they're all oil-based paints at one time or the other will tell them they amber. So on the interior, you'll see a latex paint and on the walls, and then you see oil-based paint on the doors. And a lot of times that oil-based paint will tend to amber. So in a few years, or maybe in little as a few months, you'll see a nice yellowish door compared to a nice white wall. So something to kind of keep in consideration when you're deciding what paint you're using. If you're using colors on the wall, then it's not quite as important because you don't see the vast differences on it. All right, to talk a little bit about the different kind of resins we run into. Oleo resins are generally made from linseed oil resources. They tend to yellow fast. They have a nice finish. They're used a lot in varnishes. They used to be used a lot in the old days when was a lot of wood siding houses. Oil-based resins from linseed, oil-based paints from linseed oil were used on the outside of a house. They tend to be a little bit more flexible than an alkyd. However, and they used to be what we call self-cleaning. In other words, they would chalk so fast outside that when you could get rain or any kind of a moisture on the surface, it would help wash that off and it'll take along that any kind of dirt that applied to the surface. So again, this is not something that's used a lot anymore. Wood is, you use it in varnish, but again, it's a resin that's not as common you use, especially in South Florida. Because outside, we try not to recommend any oil-based paints because oil-based paints do tend to be a food source for mildew, for faster mildew growth. Because again, the resins generally come, from natural resources where the mildew or the plant, the mildew plant likes to feed from. So those are things you have to kind of keep in consideration when you're using it. Alkyd resins are generally used interior exterior. They're hard film, they're durable. They got excellent preparation. However, generally, alkyd paints have a stronger odor than the latex counterparts, and which leads to higher VOCs. On there, there's some low VOC oil paints that are being used, but to keep oil-based paints, and again, these yellow as well. But again, what you used to do, again, when you see a paint that's starting to amber or an oil-based starting to amber, that's natural process. It's not a defect in the can of paint, but there's reasons where you want to use the oil-based paint in these particular situations. So when we're building a paint specification or you're doing maintenance work, understand what you're trying to do and to use it. And again, this is a lot of information when it talks about coatings. Use your paint manufacturer or the paint manufacturer to be able to help you decide what is the best coating for your substrate. Water dispersible alkyds. This is kind of the new and up and coming oil-based paints that are being used a lot. Again, generally, they're alkyd paints that are water dispersible. It just really kind of the new direction that industries are going to. They don't, the performance of the waterborne alkyds are almost today as good as the regular alkyds. Some contractors, the old school guys, don't like to use it, but that is kind of what we're going to be replacing in the future. We've been talking about this for the last 30 years. Alkyd paints and oil-based paints will no longer be allowed to be used, and the waterborne alkyds is kind of where everyone's going to have to go to. And then we talk about the enhancements in the pigments. These are epoxy, urethane, and silicones that we add, resins that we add to the solvent oil-based coatings. And again, it just gives it different components of what you need to do. When you start getting into some epoxies and urethanes, you have to have two components to it. In other words, a single component coating, the solvent evaporates, and the way that the process cures allows that coating to perform. Some coatings do need an activator added to it to give you for it to actually dry to a coating that's going to give you the performance that you need. So, and again, a lot of information that we have to do on here to discuss. Drying versus curing, two completely different issues that we have to deal with. Drying generally occurs with latex paints, generally occurs very quickly. But drying is essentially when the solvent evaporates from the coating that you're using. Curing is when that coating has reached the optimum hardness and chemical resistance for the use of that coating. So two completely different things you'd have to talk about. In South Florida, it's a real big issue that the way that coatings dry. Generally, when we have, for instance, outside now, when the humidity levels are so high, what that basically does is that when the humidity level is high, it's telling us that there's a lot more moisture in the air. So when you have a coating that needs to evaporate and kind of be absorbed by the air, the solvent needs to be absorbed by the air, then a lot of times what will end up happening, if it's very high humid, it will always slow down the drying times of coatings, and the curing process is just when it reaches hardness. So outside, generally, oil-based paints take a long time to get absorbed into the air, especially during summer. That's why, again, outside, we're trying to use latex as much as possible to be able to recoat. I've got an issue where we're using when oil-based paint was used on some railings outside. It was applied a little bit heavily with a lot of colorant added to it, and the coating now it's been up there for about 5 to 6 weeks, still not dry. They're still not to the point where it's cured to its optimum hardness. Latex paints generally cure. Well, we'll talk a little bit on the next part here. Alkyd paints dry generally in their ideal conditions in 4 to 8 hours. They generally cure within 10 days. Latex paints dried in 2 to 4 hours, and they cure within 30 days. Generally, with latex paint in the South Florida market during the summer, you could double or triple these times. The drying time, not so much, but the cure time, it really adds to the process, i.e. that problem that we were talking with itself. Most of the coatings, though, that are made in South Florida are manufactured, especially latex coatings outside, that they generally only need an hour to 2 hours maximum before rain could hit it, and it won't wash the paint off. So that's the way that we're allowed to be able to use latex coatings outside. While we used oil-based coatings a lot, especially during the summer months, it would really limit the amount of time that we're trying to paint. So most contractors and applicators understand this, so they know that they have to, they have to watch out for the weather and so forth. Some of the additives that we add to paint itself are mildewcide, and again, no paint is mildew proof. Some coatings add to mildew growing on it more than others. I like to call mildew the state flower of Florida because it's a plant, it grows everywhere. It'll grow on us if we stand still long enough. But essentially, most coatings have the maximum amount of mildewcide allowed by the FDA because they can be considered a contaminant or a chemical. So what mildewcides do is help prevent the mildew from growing on the coating. Doesn't guarantee it, but it will do it. Oil-based paints give mildew a food source. Latex paints from synthetic resins generally do not. However, they still can occur on latex paints itself. The best thing you could do with mildew, we'll talk a little bit about it later on, is just to be able to clean it and make sure that you're kind of sterilizing a surface when you're painting it. With bleach and water, generally what you could do. Additives to the paint will add to the flow and leveling and the film formation. We need paint to dry to a certain thickness. So, if we don't add these additives to it, it won't let the paint stay at that thickness to give you the protection and the aesthetic beauty that you need on what you're trying to do when painting a surface. The flow and leveling is essentially whenever you brush or roll something out, we need to add some chemicals to that to let it slow down a little bit so it doesn't dry too fast, especially when you're working with latex paints where the water evaporates quicker than oil-based solvents do. And what this will do, it'll allow a coating to flow or to be able to level out. So if you brush a paint and after about 10 or 15 minutes before it dries, you'd see it kind of flatten out a little bit. We add chemicals to be able to do that to the coatings itself. Surfactants are essentially soaps that manufacturers put into making a can of paint to allow all the different chemicals to be able to mix together. And again, is that making that balance, trying to make the coatings to be able to work with each other. And again, a lot of times you'll see some issues with surfactants where If moisture gets on a surfactant, then surfactants are used a lot on latex paints and water dispersible paints. It can affect, or you could see some things adding to it. Some of the additives that you could do, and I'm not going to get into what each one of these does, but you see different names. They're pretty much the names really kind of tell you what they're trying to do. Rheology modifiers, really what we're talking about here in rheology modifiers is the way it's kind of helping that paint film build. We could add different chemicals to it to keep that paint film up. And coalescing, latex paints tend to dry in with coalescing. That's how latex paints cure. And again, this is just some chemicals we add to it to allow this process to go a little bit further with it. The solvents on the third component of paint, really kind of when you use pigment and resin, it's the powder and generally a glue type product that we use on it. It's very viscous, very thick. The solvent is allowed to be able to lower that viscosity of the coating and make it be able to apply to the substrate. At the same time, that solvent will evaporate and leave that protective coatings on the surface itself. So oil-based paints, generally, the oil-based paints have a higher VOCs or odor. Latex paints have lower. The type of thinners that are generally used in oil-based could be anything from naphtha to phenol spirits to xylol, ketones. It's just a lot of different things. All these have odor, and all these generally tend to dry a little bit faster, evaporate a little bit slower than latex paints do. Latex paints, we have ethylene glycol and propylene glycol, but generally in latex paints, the basic solvent that are being used, of course, is water itself. VOCs, we've been talking about VOCs, but essentially VOCs, like we mentioned before, are the volatile organic compounds. They are emitted from solids or liquids, and they again, some of them have long-term and short-term health effects. So we try to, the EPA is really kind of limiting the amount of VOCs that any kind of coating can emit. Interior, you'll find that generally most all new latex coatings or all coatings used interior are low VOCs, while exterior, there's generally not the kind of restrictions held on that. So in VOCs, you'll find the VOCs in oil-based and solvents, and some of the coalescing aids that we talked about, some of the glycols that kind of help everything, the chemicals that are used in colorants, and a lot of them in universal colorants itself. Again, a glycol, we haven't talked on that. It's a kind of a liquid used to prevent water-based paints from freezing, kind of almost like when you add an additive to your radiator in your car. You don't want that to freeze, because if it freezes, it'll do that. But again, it kind of affects the way the coating is prevented. But they do contain a lot of VOC. So a lot of the industry changes are trying to get glycols that have low VOC, but still give us the same performance that's needed on itself, on the performance of the coating itself. So again, the chemicals, the VOC content, again, just add to it. And then the emissions is what you're trying to see. And this is where a lot of the government intervention is trying to push through. In South Florida, we have quite a few. We're part of what we call the National Association, but what you're seeing here is that different countries and different parts of the country have created what we call low odor or VOC restricted areas with coatings. That really has affected manufacturers as they're trying to create coatings that will fit these different areas. Generally, if you lower the VOC of a coating, that's going to affect the performance of the coating. So you have to kind of try to create another coating itself. So generally, I think what we're all manufacturers are trying to push through is that to get a national model. And that's just yet something that hasn't really happened yet, but you'll eventually, in the future, you'll see that we have all these different type of codes across the country and you have, as a national manufacturer, you need to try to make something that's going to fit. Most of the products that we make match or are able to be used in most all of these areas now, in anticipation of a national model that will be coming out to help eliminate and simplify all these different kind of systems in there. There are different type of certifications for VOC across the country, and these are some of the names and everything that you'll see on there itself. And again, when you're talking about The pigments, we're talking about the components of paint. Pigments give you the color and the hide. They give you the resins, give you the binder. They hold the pigments together. The additives gives you the specific properties that you need, and the solvent. So as you see here, this is a real important part to understand about coatings. So when we're coming out to your property to be able to recommend a certain coating, we want to make sure that the coatings that you're using kind of fit your products. That's why we have 4,000 SKUs, because you can make a different balance in each one, from cost to performance to hide and so forth to odor control. So that's where it's really important to understand the difference in the prices of coatings and what we're trying to do to achieve. Gloss and sheen, it's a real simple process. Essentially, you'll see we're going to talk a little bit about what makes a paint flat, what makes a paint shiny. Generally, glosses reflect more light, they're durable, they're more washable. However, they tend to accentuate surface defects. Sheen, flat, mattes, and eggshell, they diffuse light. They make a wall look a lot real nicer. They hide imperfections, and they're generally a little bit easier for touch-ups themselves. And what I'm trying to show on this screen is how you make a gloss to a flat. The green that you're seeing here, when a coating is dried and it's on the surface, the green area is what we call the resin, and the blue particles that you're seeing on there is what we call pigment. So when we make a paint shiny, a resin or the glue, if it has nothing in there kind of sticking through the top of the coating, it'll be a very flat surface. As light hits it, it will reflect and make that surface look shiny. The way manufacturers manufacture paint is that we calculate the amount of pigment compared to resin. So when it cures, you have some of these particles of pigment sticking out. So you'll start to get less light reflecting in the same direction, so that areas doesn't look as flat or as shiny as some of these areas do. And then when we make it flat, we make sure that the resin content is lower than the pigment. And so you have a lot of these particles sticking up. So then you'll have a lot of light kind of bouncing off in different directions, which will make the surface appear flat itself. And we're going to get into some of the characteristics of why we use a gloss and when we use a summer gloss and so forth, and some of the indications on there. When you're looking at the paint business, there's no one standard that everyone uses. However, paint sheen is measured in two different angles. Sheen is measured from an 85-degree angle. Gloss is measured from a 60-degree angle from the substrate. And again, that's how we determine gloss, but there's not one standard that the entire industry uses. So what I'm saying is that a gloss from Sherwin-Williams and a gloss from Benmore or from Behr are going to look, all three of them are going to look a little bit different. They'll be shiny, but they won't have the same amount of gloss. It's always a good idea to refer back to your technical data sheet to be able to understand that. There is one, the MPI is the Master Painters Institute. They've tried to create a kind of a gloss standard, and you'll see what we have the different levels here. But even that is really not being found or used across the country on a regular basis.
Rudy,
again,
real quick, does the same thing apply to paints that, one of the questions here, which looks like it's related, what paints have a heat reflective property and are they effective? So I'm guessing it's all related based on color.
To a certain degree. Generally, when you're talking about heat reflective, you're talking about more metallic finishes. That's where aluminum tends to have, that's some of the pigments that we use in there to help reflect some of the heat itself. This really refers to the sheen level and to this refers to the sheen level. Let me go back a couple of slides here. When you go to a paint that has, for instance, a shiny surface like that, that makes it very washable because nothing really sticks to it. If you go to a flat, you could see that you're gonna have a lot of issues when you're trying to clean because there's a lot of crevices where dirt could hide. So that's where a flat paint is not as washable, and a sheen, if you need a sheen level. But again, a flat paint, a lot of light reflects off of there. So if you see, we're talking about how thin a coat of paint is. If you see a lot of shine reflecting, especially at an angle, you're going to see all the surface defects with a glossy finish. But with a flat, you're not going to see that same kind of surface defects, even though they're still there. However, if you're needing to clean a surface all the time, for instance, in a hallway that's used a lot, you don't want to use a flat because the constant cleaning is going to smooth these areas out. They're always going to constantly get dirty. and then they're going to be it's going to be hard to keep these, that area looking right. So again, it's about building the right system for that particular condition of that particular area that you're trying to paint. So that's again what we're trying to do with it. And again, this kind of shows you a little bit of what we're talking about before on a technical data sheet. Glosses and sheen levels don't match across different brands. So it's something you have to kind of keep in mind on there. So specifications. And again, what I like to talk about here, a manufacturer's rep like myself, we're going to be, when you're doing a project we've talked about in the previous one, we're going to, because of all the variety of coatings that we talked about here, it's really not in the wheelhouse of a property manager or a board to understand it all. Some are, but it's always good, like we're using structural engineers and so forth, and it's all these experts in the different fields that we go with, use the knowledge of the components. Most of again, a manufacturer's rep, we're going to be well versed. This is all I do. I know the area. I've been working in the area quite a bit. We're able to tell you what are the best value-wise. We ask a lot of questions in regards to value, durability, what cost are you going to be able to have on there, and we try to recommend the best solutions on there to put this paint specifications together. And a paint specification really just it's a set of instructions and guidelines to be able to give to the contractor when you want them to put a price on your project. That way, the board, the property manager is in control, not the contractor. Because let me tell you, if you get 5 different contractors to give you a price for painting a building on the outside, you're going to get 5 different prices. You're going to get 5 different systems of how to prepare, and you're going to get 5 different types of coatings on how to prepare. So it's really it's really kind of good idea to use the manufacturers on there. But these are some of the things that we kind of look into when we're talking about manufacturing. On paint technology, there's we touch about it on some of these kind of coatings, that specific pigments that are being used. There's things now like scuff resistant paint that give the paint a scuff resistance. So in high traffic areas and hallways, we're selling quite a bit of this in areas and lobbies or in hallways, in schools where there's always a constant repainting. There's scuff resistant paints that kind of make this a little bit easier to do this kind of touch up, along with, and again, there's all kinds of technologies, and by contacting your paint manufacturer, we're able to work with you. What's in the future? There's a lot of different things that are coming. There's pigments that are being worked on that are thermochromic, photochromic, electrochromic. Thermochromic, essentially, when heat's applied, the color changes. Remember the mood ring, that kind of stuff. The photochromic, they change, and when light hits it, for instance, when you're using those transition eyeglasses, those are, again, these are just pigments and resins that are the pigments that are being used. And electrochromic is coming, where you actually change, you can actually run a current through the coating itself, and it'll give you, it'll change the color. So those are some of the things that are coming on there. But there's a lot of other areas, with biotechnology coming in, and again, improved additives. Carbon nanotechnology is, again, it's a technology needed to reduce the film thickness and cost in epoxies and urethanes. It helps you strengthen the film integrity, making that film a little bit, maybe 5 to 7 times more flexible, while increasing the corrosion resistance. So again, that's a lot toward the industrial market that we deal with here. So again, this is some of the stuff that's coming in the future. There's fun stuff like Nissan a couple years ago patented a paint that is dirt resistant. In other words, that you're never going to have to use a car wash on your car, because the paint, the dirt, and everything not supposed to stick. There are coatings in the industry that supposedly do that nowadays, but again, you'll find that most of Nissan still hasn't been able to come out with that. Most of the time that you'll find when you have paint sticking to surfaces, and especially an exterior, is the fact that we have very dirty air in our area from pollution. Most of the stuff that's floating in the air has a little bit of solvent from all the exhaust and everything that we do, and these tend to stick to the substrates themselves. And if dirt was on the surface, most of the coatings will be able to wash it off, but these solvents and everything that are used from the pollution actually affect the way that the coatings looks like. In summary, finally to the end, it's been I kind of rushed through this, but I wanted to make sure we went through everything on there. I hope that we were able to explain completely the different functions of the 4 components of the paint and their impact on performance and on cost. That's a real big piece where you have to kind of understand that the aesthetic and durability of the features of the different paint finishes. So again, when you use if you have a highly washable area, it's an area that you need a lot of cleaning, use a harder finish and a glossier finish to be able to give the most durability in that particular area. But again, recognize that a higher finish, a higher sheen area is going to sew up all the defects of that substrate itself. Use a manufacturer rep when you're using the specification process and so forth like that. So at the end, that's really what I have to present. If we have any kind of questions, again, this particular side is, again, it's a lot of information that you maybe don't need, but we really need to understand what a paint does to make sure that you're using the right paint outside, inside, and the cost. So it's a real important part of painting. Again, we talked about before, is one of the biggest expenses you can have in your community. Use the right paint. Don't overbuy, but don't underbuy either, because that could end up costing you more money in the long
run. That's fantastic. And one of the things that you reinforced for me, and I'm sure for many other people, paint is not about beautification. Yes, it adds to beautification, but it's so much more than that. It's protection, it's safety, it affects integrity. I mean, this was fantastic, and this is wonderful information. We have about 6 minutes left in the advertised time. We have about 7 or 8 questions here in the queue.
Okay.
So let's get to them. Let me stop the share here so we can see you. There we go.
There you go.
So Ralph asks, we are looking into removing the tile on our catwalks and then painting the concrete floors. What type of paint should be used and what prep work is needed? So if you can summarize that, that'd be great.
Great. Okay. Again, there are specific floor paints that are made. Floor paints generally are horizontal. They're not vertical like most paints are. So you need to be able to have a coating that could resist ponding water on some catwalks. Also, you need a resin that's going to be able to take stepping on, to walking on. The wall paints are generally softer, so you can't use it on the floor, but generally you don't want to use the floor paint on a wall because it's too hard and you're not going to get the flexibility, so you need the durability. So that's what you do it. Prepping, get off as much of the substrate as possible, especially when you have tile on there. If you could get down to the bare coat, to the bare substrate and start from there, that'll be the best way to start. Understand though, that when you paint on the floor does not last as long as paint on the wall, and you're asking for maintenance purposes, even as much as maybe every 1 to 2 years when you're talking about painting on the floor.
Okay, so the follow-up question, thank you. So higher gloss paint is better for well water used for sprinklers where the water splashes on the building. Does that make sense?
It would be, absolutely. Yeah, it'll help resist dirt pickup. However, the higher gloss paint is also going to show more of the defects that you're using out there. Generally, we try to go with what we call a satin finish or an eggshell finish outside. So it's a compromise. It's not real shiny, but it's not flat either. So you get kind of a compromise between the both of them.
Okay. Yvonne has a pretty easy question. Back with COVID, you couldn't get wood, you couldn't get building materials. Is there still a shortage in paint? Where are we now?
Absolutely. I'm spending close to about half my day right now trying to figure out where to fit coatings in and so forth. So if you're doing painting projects, we didn't talk on that, it's a good point. Keep in mind, whether the manufacturer is going to be able to supply the paint for that coating itself, because of demand. Again, essentially, it's just that the demand right now is so high that all manufacturers that I'm aware of cannot keep up with that demand. And the cost is going up. So yeah, just and understand that as we move forward. And the bubble of this particular bubble that we're in, at least in my part of the business, we're expecting this to last at least another 6 months or more, into next year. So shortages are going to be something we're all going to have to live with here for a little while.
Yeah. Okay. It's good information to know. Annie has a couple of questions here. What would you recommend for around the pool? Something more slip resistant. I know you covered a little bit earlier.
Yeah. When you're putting on, and when you put it on a floor, You don't want to use a paint that has a lot of sheen to it, because one of the things on the sheen is that it'll make it more durable, but a little bit of water on it make it very slippery. So, but at the same time, we usually try to add sand into floor coatings to give it a little bit of traction on there. But the caveat, when you do something, it has a reaction to it. And the reaction with putting too much sand on the floor tends to get a little bit dirty. So that's why you have to kind of, it's a balance of what you're trying to achieve on it. But any coating, any floor coating that's applied will make the surface generally make it more slipperier than it would than before it was painted, because a fresh coat of paint will make a floor very where you can slip.
Okay. And I guess it's kind of a follow-up. Annie also asked, can you use anti-skid on a boat deck?
Yeah, absolutely. But then again, make sure that the manufacturer, I don't sell a lot of boat paints, but make sure that the manufacturer will allow that to happen. But when you do add texture to it, it's going to make the surface a little bit, it's going to get dirt. It's going to be able to attract and hold dirt more than something that does not have the additive to it.
Okay. Now, before we get to the next few questions, on the evaluation, if you want Rudy to contact you, please, there's a question just for that about how we may be able to help you or your association. So please check that. I see some of you already done that. And with that in mind, I'll read this one time, but then if you have any other location service questions, put it onto the survey. Teresa wants to know, do you service the St. Augustine area?
I don't. I go from Vero Beach all the way down through Broward County. Those are the areas that I cover, but I have colleagues that will work those areas. So if you need some information, let me know, and I'll send you the information from my colleagues. We try to be, as a manufacturer's rep, we try to be what we call do paint forensics. Yeah. In other words, we'll go out there and determine why you're having a failure or what you need. But we have people that cover the entire country. So
Rudy, is there a fee for a paint estimate process or a proposal?
Generally, no. All the services that we talk about are all at no charge. Just part, we are in a very competitive business. So we try to outservice, for myself, I try to outservice and have all these issues so that we can make sure that we're giving you the best service and best coating, and makes you a reason why you want to use Benjamin Moore paints.
Cool. Do you have time for a few more? I know we're at 11:30 now, but can we do the last few?
Absolutely. Be more than happy to stay on.
Okay, so if anybody types in anything now, we won't get to them live. We're going to do the remaining ones in the queue, but Rudy will get them all via email from us, so no worries there. They'll get addressed, just not live on the air. So okay. Trevor asked, can the new latex paints be applied over alkyd oil-based paint?
You have to prepare, if you're painting over top of an oil-based paint, they're generally a little bit harder finish. So you either have to, use a transition coat, something that will stick to an oil-based paint, and then we'll use a latex paint on top of it. Or one of the best things is just to prepare that surface. In other words, an oil-based surface has to be scuffed. It has to be, you have to make marks in it to where the latex paint can anchor itself to it. Latex paints can't adhere to oil-based paints because they're so hard. So you got to scratch that surface. But one of the things that we weren't able to cover, oil-based paints they cure by oxidation. They will reach an optimum hardness. However, they will continue to get hard and harder over after coating. So an oil-based paint that's 20 years old compared to one that's 5 years old, if you take that paint film, a 20-year-old paint film, oil-based paint will snap because it's so hard. While an oil-based paint, the same thickness will tend to be a little bit more flexible and bend.
Okay. Would it be the same kind of paint for an exterior building's garage door, window frame, and patio frame?
The same kind of paint's used on the wall? No, it'll be a different. You're painting unit on top of metal, so you're going to be using a paint that's a little bit more durable. Latex wall paints need to be able to breathe a little bit more, so you use a different type of resin. You can use waterborne coatings, but it's a different resin that's being used on those areas.
Okay. The same person asked a question. It might be a little too specific, so if it is, just say so after I read it, and you could answer it via email. Okay. Can we use a different paint product to paint over the original competitor's SW is the initial paint, and what would be the process?
I could, that'll probably be a question I could to contact you directly, or my colleagues to contact you directly. But yes, most coatings are again, like I said in the beginning, there's no secrets to paint. Everybody manufactures paint. We all just try to manufacture a coating to be able to deliver what you need. but we don't match each other. But most of the coatings we can prepare and tell you how to be able to paint anybody's surface. We just need to see it to make sure we're recommending the right products and
Rudy,
preparation for you.
can you guys also, like, if you don't actually provide the product for an association, can you also provide the consultation to be like their provider in the back pocket, that they pay you sort of a retainer and you make sure that whoever they are using does the right thing, or is that something you don't do?
No, we don't. Actually, that's part of my job. I mean, as you know, one of the differences between me and some of the national manufacturers, we're national. However, we always go through just privately owned businesses, locally owned businesses to distribute our product. While these other companies have national, they own the location. The cost structure is the same. We just don't make money on the paint part, on the paint store part about it. But my job is to be able to provide that for end users, to be that consultant, that paint forensic specialist, to be able to tell you what coating to use. And that's what I'm paid for to do. That's what I've been doing for 32 plus years.
Excellent. I think somebody might have just gotten a little confused by the two logos on the advertisement. So somebody who came in a little bit late, says that you know that you may have stated this earlier, but what is the percentage cost of paint in a project?
Generally,
Typically,
when you're painting a project, the general cost is going to, to be conservative, it'll be anywhere from 15 to 25% of the cost of a project. A lot of times it's closer though to the 15% to 20% number.
Okay. There was a question about the evaluation link. You'll get that after the webinar. I also just placed it into the chat, so you can click on the evaluation link on the chat, and it'll be an email you get tomorrow. Okay, we have just two more questions here. I don't know what she meant here. Can concert? She might have been a typo. And wood wall paint. So what it says here is, can concert and wood wall paint? I don't know what what she might have meant it to type. Can concert and wood wall paint be used for patio metal frame? If no, what would you suggest? But I don't know what she means by concert.
She might mean concrete. She was trying to maybe put concrete in there. If it is, no, there's different, there's paints that are going to work better for you on metal chairs than will work for you on concrete and wood, if that's what you have. And that, contact me directly. I'll be able to tell you specifically if we got it wrong.
We have one more question from Joan. What are steps needed to remove tiles from balconies and replace with concrete? Is that something you can answer?
Generally, a lot of elbow grease. The best thing you have to take it off. Get a contractor to be able to, unless you want to do it yourself. It's a lot of work to be able to take those tiles off a concrete walkway.
Okay. And thank you for that. That's all of the questions. Now, before we turn it back to you, Rudy, for some final words, and for Terry for some final words, the evaluation will have Rudy's contact information. The link for the evaluation is now in the chat. And again, it'll be in an email that you receive tomorrow morning as well. So you have several opportunities, buttons to download the PowerPoints for today's two presentations are also on that evaluation page on the upper left, the little green, blue buttons, I believe they are, or green buttons. And, but just in case anybody has already filled the evaluation, I might have missed it. Rudy, how do people contact you directly, please?
Okay, the best way to contact me is just by phone. 305-796-9860 is my direct cell phone number. I live in the Jupiter area, so that's where I'm right in the middle of the area that I cover. Or you can email me at Rudy, text me or call me, or email me at Rudy, RUDY.Forjan, FORJAN @benjaminmoore.com. And I'll be, then I'll reach out to you as quickly as I can and set up an appointment to either look at your situation, or I could answer just questions simply over the phone for you. That's great. And I've been seeing the evaluations come in. A lot of people ask for you to contact them directly. Rest assured, Rudy will be getting all of the data that came in from the evaluations. And Rudy also earlier mentioned in the first part of the presentation about reserve studies. This Friday, we have a fundamentals of reserves course right here on Zoom. And you can register for that if you haven't already done so. I see some of you already have, at tskmarketing.com, and then go to the webinars event section, and you can register for free directly from there as well. You'll love Will Simons just as much as y'all loved Rudy. A lot of great comments here. We thank you very, very much. Terry, I'm going to turn it back over to you to close it out for today.
Well, thank you all for coming. I can't see the screen, but I hope you can hear me.
We see you, I promise. We see you.
You do? Okay, well.
You look beautiful, Terry.
Thanks. Well, I think everybody said all there is to say. I hope we'll see you all on Friday and for Will. And our next live event is July 21st, where you'll be hearing from DSS on how to organize a project and budget for it. So whether it's a paint project or a association reserve project, they're going to teach us all how to do it, how to budget for it, and how to get it right. So with that, thank you. I hope we'll see you at our next two events. And Jeff, is there anything else we need to do?
You nailed it. Rudy, you were fantastic. Thank you, everybody. I'll stay on an extra couple of minutes here. So, Terry and Rudy, if you need to go, I know y'all are busy. I'll stay on so to give people time to go into the chat and click on the evaluation link, and I'll put it in there one more time. So I'll stay on for like another 60 seconds or so. But thank you both. Excellent, excellent session.
Thank you. And one more thing, again, just as a reminder for the CU portion, if you need a certificate, contact me directly. So that way I can get the, like, email me and I'll get it. I'll get the certificate to you. And again, anything that you need, feel free to contact me directly. And again, Terry, Jeff, thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to do the presentation. And again, always there to help out and to make our community a better community. So thank you.
Thanks for being one of our members, Rudy. We really appreciate you.
Not a problem.
All right. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Peace, everyone.